but it actually showed a lowering of these stress scales in trauma. And I think it's important to understand that this then provides an eye-opening solution for how we can rethink what are the ways in which we can help trauma victims and we can help. I'm a big believer that many of us have experienced trauma and we don't really identify it. So I think the fact that eating something as simple as a blueberry and having that on a regular basis, because for one, we need our fiber in our diet, we need those delicious phytonutrients, but we also really need our servings of fruit. And berries, especially blueberries, are a great way to do that. But the fact that they can also target symptoms related to trauma is hugely beneficial to many of us.
Well, I'm joined on the Happy Habit podcast today by nutritional psychiatrist Dr. Uma Naidoo, and she is an author of the wildly popular book, This Is Your Brain on Food, an indispensable guide to the surprising foods that fight depression, anxiety, PTSD, OCD, ADHD, and more. Now, we've heard the term "you are what you eat" many, many times down through the years, and we know that if we don't exercise correctly, what we eat will end up around our waist. But this book makes the case that what we eat affects our brains as much, if not more, than our waistlines.
This is correct, and that's really the message you wanted to bring forward with This Is Your Brain on Food, which really has asked the question, what happens to the food that we eat, and why haven't we been paying attention to how food impacts mood, or food impacts anxiety, or all of the different conditions that I break down in the book. So it was meant to be intended really to be the different mental health conditions that are the most common, and looking at the science behind the foods that we want to add into our diets and the foods that we slowly want to step back from. And I think that it also has recipes to go with each chapter, as well as lists of foods at the back, so that you can literally take photographs and take these to the supermarket and choose, or however you acquire your groceries, really choose the foods that you want to be eating for different health conditions. And it's meant to be shared. You may have a coworker, a family member, a friend who's suffering with something, and it's meant to be something that people can interact around and have a conversation about food and their mental well-being.
Well, the book has some really eye-opening facts, and this will amaze people. Blueberries help cope with the after effects of trauma. How so?
They do. So some research done really looked at blueberries and the impact on the brain. And these were in individuals who had been traumatized. Now, the specific study that I quote in the book um, was, the first iteration of these studies were actually in animals, but it actually showed a lowering of these stress scales in trauma. And I think it's important to understand that this then provides an eye-opening solution for how we can rethink what are the ways in which we can help trauma victims and we can help. I'm a big believer that many of us have experienced trauma and we don't really identify it. So I think the fact that eating something as simple as a blueberry and having that on a regular basis, because for one, we need our fiber in our diet, we need those delicious phytonutrients, but we also really need our servings of fruit. And berries, especially blueberries, are a great way to do that. But the fact that they can also target symptoms related to trauma is hugely beneficial to many of us.
Can we talk about the relationship between vitamin D and how it can help anxiety? And then can you give us some
Mm.
sources of vitamin D that
Yes, so vitamin D is really a neurosteroid, and it is something that, believe it or not, one of the easiest ways to get vitamin D is to spend 10 minutes in outdoor time before you apply sunscreen or sunblock. This then metabolizes in your body, and you get about 80% of your daily requirement of vitamin D. Vitamin D actually helps mood, but it also helps to lower anxiety. So these are easy things that you can do. It's found in things like eggs, certain types of mushrooms, and certain fortified foods. But most of the time, I try to direct people to those whole foods as much as I can. So I think it's just an important thing to be able to include. Also, I find that in the far northeast of the United States, there are many people who may be deficient because we have a different level of sunshine. So it's also important here to be tested by your doctor if you're afraid or fearful or concerned that you may be deficient in vitamin D before you start supplementing it. But you can always use food as a way to improve your levels.
The book opens with a chapter on the link between the brain and the gut. Now, why is this so significant?
It's significant because until, it is interesting, Hippocrates, the really the father of modern allopathic medicine, pointed to this eons ago that there was this connection, but the science and the hard facts and the research had to follow. So, over the last decade and a half to 2 decades, there's been an emerging amount of science around the gut microbiome as well as a burgeoning amount of research. So, what we've now understood is that there's the gut microbiome, there's now gut brain connection. The gut and brain originate from the exact same cells in the human embryo. They divide up apart to form the gut and the brain. Then they are connected throughout our lives anatomically by the 10th cranial nerve, which is the vagus nerve. And this allows for text messaging and messages, chemical messages like neurotransmitters, to be moved up and down all day, all night throughout our lives. But also, about 90 to 95% of serotonin and serotonin receptors are in the gut. So that also helps us understand that there's a very big interaction around the food that we're eating, those neurotransmitters and that interaction. So understanding that the gut-brain connection explains and unfolds the food-mood connection is one of the big sort of revelations that came forward with This Is Your Brain on Food.
I like that term, the food mood connection. I hadn't heard that before. Can we talk about then the importance of nourishing the diversity of the microbiome, the bacteria in our guts, then, so as our physical and our mental health can benefit from that?
Right. I really appreciate that you make that point because people just assume there's only one way, one solution to improving our gut microbiome, but actually there are many. The more colors, the more textures, the different types of food that you can eat and include in your diet, especially plant foods. And the reason is that you get fiber from vegetables, fruit, beans, nuts, seeds, legumes, and healthy whole grains. You don't really get it from animals, seafood, or other sources of non-plant protein. So those are an important component of a diet as well. But if you're really looking to improve that biodiversity, try to up your game and think about different colors of vegetables and different names of vegetables and fruit that you can add to your diet every single week. And actually create a fun checklist. Have a game with yourself, like how many different vegetables am I eating today? How many colors? How many am I adding to my salad? By the end of this week, how many would I have checked off on a list that are different? And that way, you're not only expanding your palate in terms of eating more delicious foods, you're improving the biodiversity that you are bringing back to those microbes in the gut microbiome.
You are one of many medical professionals who hold aloft the Mediterranean diet. Why is this diet held up as the gold standard, really, of what we should be eating?
Well, for one thing, I think it's versatile and it allows for a breadth of different foods that many people eat. It is rich in those plant-based foods, but healthy versions of the colorful vegetables, the different types of fruit, but healthy fats, the omega-3s, the olive oil, the nuts and seeds that our bodies need. And then, the proteins, whether it's a type of seafood that you wish to eat or type of poultry, maybe it's a piece of chicken. All of these things are have, in my opinion, been helpful for us to allow people to understand there's good research behind the diet. It's looked at things like depression, it's looked at things like cardiovascular health, but at the same time, many people can actually access these foods. Now, um, you know, we want to expand that as we think about maybe diversifying that definition, but sticking to the beans, legumes, the lentils, the avocado, the olive oil, the healthy fats, the seafood, the poultry, and an abundance of plant foods is a great way for any of us to go. I'd much rather have people almost feel that accessibility of that this kind of diet than really hone in on, well, let's give up that food group and the sort of eat this, not that mentality in the US, or let's give up this food and see how we feel. I think eliminations are important when there are symptoms, but it should be done carefully and not because a food group should be excluded for a reason that's not based in science.
You explore the subject of OCD and OCD sufferers in the book. What foods should they avoid?
One of the things with OCD is that there are natural sources of glutamates, and the natural sources of glutamates can actually drive OCD. And these can be found in foods that people are consuming and not realizing that they could be driving symptoms. Many people realize the added sugars and those foods we know to be unhealthy, but unfortunately, the glutamates found in things like fish sauce, oyster sauce, just tomato sauce, miso, which is a fermented food, it's fermented soybean, and I would ordinarily want you to be eating a lot of fermented foods. Unfortunately, also contains natural sources of glutamates, and these can actually drive symptoms. So in the book, I have lists of foods which have these natural glutamates and can worsen your symptoms. And it's just a way that you want to be a little bit more careful.
Is the relationship between ADHD and gluten?
Yes, I mean, to the extent that we've seen in the research, I think the thing about ADHD is that we know that one of the biggest offenders is actually, sugar and glucose. Um, but if you think about it, there's also the conditions like celiac disease and non-celiac gluten sensitivity. And those individuals really do need to, for health reasons, really avoid products that contain gluten, which is this the most important protein in wheat. So one of the ways to think about it is to slowly eliminate gluten and to see if any symptoms improve. So it's definitely one that came up with the ADHD studies. But at the same time, I think there are many foods we can add in, like minerals from zinc, iron, magnesium, and potassium. Polyphenols from berries, cherries, onions, even green tea that can help focus and attention. So lots of things that we can also add in and consider having a short elimination of gluten to see if the symptoms of attention and focus may improve.
And towards the end of the book, all of the research and the advice come together when you discuss how to cook for a healthy brain. What would be your go-to foods or meals when you're trying to eat for a healthy brain?
So I mentioned my favorites, golden chai or my golden latte. I also love the recipe for spinach dal, which is like a lentil soup. It has spinach in it. It has, the lentils, which give you the fiber and the nutrients that you need. But for me, it's sort of an all-around favorite. But then I also love things like some of the snack foods and the chia puddings, because they're simple, easy to make ahead, breakfast that I can keep in my fridge but have them. And sometimes if I don't have them for breakfast, I have them as a snack late in the day. And I make them differently. I add different toppings to them, like berries or nuts, things that make it interesting. And one of my favorites, extra dark chocolate. So I think, I like a lot of the recipes there, but those are some of my favorites that I talk about time and time again.
I'm a fan of dark chocolate myself. The higher the amount of cocoa in it, the better.
Better.
The book is called "This Is Your Brain on Food." Dr. Uma Naidoo, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you, Matthew. It's been a pleasure to talk to you.
Hey there, friends. If you got value from this video, well, you know the deal. Please like, subscribe, share, and I will see you in the next one.